Hello, and welcome to today's Wellness webinar. My name is Shane Drosy, and I'm the Wellness Coordinator for the National Alliance on Mental Illness in San Diego. I have the privilege of working on a team of inspiring individuals who devote themselves to empowering their community with cutting-edge technology, apps, training classes, and wellness resources. Our project is funded by the County of San Diego Health and Human Services Agency through the Mental Health Services Act. Our goal is the creation and expansion of opportunities for uses of technology and strategies which support culturally competent recovery and resilience. The services are provided to existing consumers and family members of consumers of the behavioral health services system. The project was aligned under the MHSA Capital Facilities and Technological Needs Plan and is called the Consumer and Family Empowerment Technology Project, also known as the NAMI San Diego Tech Cafe. Before I begin today's wellness webinar surrounding mental health and a faith-based approach to mental health, I'd like to go over a few housekeeping tips with you all. You will notice in the upper right-hand corner of your YouTube screen, there is an eye. If you click on that eye, it will allow you the opportunity to engage in a short poll designed specifically for this wellness webinar. There is a link to bring you to the Tech Cafe website, as well as the option of donating directly to NAMI San Diego. If you haven't done so already, we'd love to engage with you on social media. You can like us on Twitter and Instagram, or follow us on Facebook at NAMI San Diego. Today's wellness webinar is surrounding Mental Health Ministries. You can visit their website at www.mentalhealthministries.net, and at the conclusion of this wellness webinar, I will go over their website with you all in more detail. Finally, before I begin the interview, there is an important disclosure to discuss. The views, opinions, and positions expressed by the authors and those providing comments on this wellness webinar are theirs alone and do not necessarily reflect the views, opinions, or positions of the National Alliance on Mental Illness in San Diego, or NAMI San Diego. We make no representations as to accuracy, completeness, timeliness, suitability, or validity of any information presented by individual authors and/or commenters on our webinars, and will not be liable for any errors, omissions, or delays in this information, or any losses, injuries, or damages arising for its display or use. Alright, now that that's out of the way, I do hope you enjoyed today's wellness webinar on Mental Health Ministries.
While working on a lesson in world religions, a kindergarten teacher asked her students to bring something related to their faith to class. At show and tell, she asked the students to come forward and share a symbol of their faith with the class. The first child said, "My name is Muhammad, I am Muslim, and this is a prayer rug." The second child said, "My name is Rachel, I am Jewish, and I brought a Star of David." And the third child said, "My name is Mary, I'm Catholic, and this is a rosary." The fourth child said, "My name is John, I'm a Methodist, and I brought a casserole dish." Well, my name is Susan, and I am a former kindergarten teacher and a United Methodist minister. I'm also a person who lives with a mental illness, and I am the mother of an adult son who also has mental health issues and a son-in-law who lives with bipolar disorder. And while we can laugh at this joke, the reality is that mental illness is often a no casserole illness, invisible to so many. Based on the findings of the National Institute of Mental Health, we know that 1 in 5 persons sitting in the pews has a diagnosable mental illness in any given year. Of those 25% of Americans with a diagnosable illness, only about 41% receive care. This means that half do not. In sharing my story, I hope to lift up some ways that our faith communities can respond to this challenge. My depression began in 1991. I was in my third year as a first female pastor at San Diego First United Methodist Church in Mission Valley. I was enjoying my career and the many opportunities for serving others that it offered. I liked being part of a large staff, and I had no doubt that I had made the right decision to answer my call and leave my teaching career to become an ordained minister. Despite my experience in counseling, I did not recognize or understand what was happening to me. In the fall of 1991, a series of events hit me like waves until I was totally overwhelmed with despair. I had all the symptoms of major depression. I felt disoriented and disconnected from my feelings and from myself. I couldn't eat or sleep. Nothing brought me pleasure, and I was simply going through the motions. I didn't want to be around others, and I isolated myself as much as possible. And I felt so hopeless that I wanted to end my life and actually developed an elaborate suicide plan. I was in such psychological pain that I clung to St. Paul's words from Romans 8. Nothing can separate us from the love of God. Neither death, nor life, nor angels, nor rulers, nor heights, nor depths, etc. Death felt like a better alternative to the psychological pain I was experiencing. I was sent to a psychiatrist who happened to be a member of my church. It was one of the most humbling experiences of my life, as I was enveloped with guilt and shame. He wanted to admit me to a psychiatric hospital that day. After several days of denial on my part, and because my husband could not continue to stay home from work to be with me, I was admitted to Sharp Mesa Vista Hospital. It happened to be the same hospital where I had conducted worship service when I was doing my clinical pastoral education work for the ministry. Only the small chapel that I used at that time had now been converted to a barber shop, which says a lot about the importance placed on spirituality in treatment programs today. Few people at my church knew about my depression or about my hospitalization, and I did have subsequent hospitalizations. For 2 years, I suffered in silence, hiding my condition from the church community because the stigma and the fear of losing my job. The sad truth is that hundreds of clergy have been forced to leave the ministry because the stigma and ignorance associated with mental illnesses. It was my senior pastor who stood by me, who believed in grace, and who believed in me. With his support, I finally decided to openly acknowledge my depression. I wrote an article for the church newsletter entitled "The Burden of Silence." The senior pastor wrote an accompanying article about the stigma and ignorance associated with mental health illness. Our parish nurse set up an informational meeting on depression, and we ended up having a turnaway crowd of over 130 people. Seeing such a great need, a depression support group was started, led by a professional counselor from our church. The religious community has much to do to address the shame, the guilt, and the stigma associated with mental illness. Unfortunately, very few seminaries incorporate adequate information about mental illness in their core curriculum. We know that many individuals with a mental health issue go first to their faith leader for help. Yet studies have shown that faith leaders are often not trained to provide appropriate support and referral information. I am one of the wounded healers described by Henry Nouwen. I have had subsequent hospitalizations and a variety of DSM diagnoses that have changed over the years. But you cannot put a label on the human spirit. I know that I need to continue to take my medications, maintain a good support system, and practice good self-care as well as preventable care at those times when I feel most vulnerable. I've learned coping skills and have developed inner resources. I relate to the words of Louisa May Alcott, who said, "I am not afraid of the storms, for I am learning how to sail my ship." Many of us espouse an integrative approach to mental illness, a philosophy of treatment that acknowledges the physical, emotional, and the spiritual components of these illnesses. The reality is that our mental health provider system is based on a medical model that mostly focuses on the illness and not on the many other needs of the individual. The medical model looks for a cure. The emphasis is on finding answers and the relief of symptoms. And as we know, many times there is not a cure, but we can learn to accept and manage our mental, physical, and spiritual health. There can be healing, which is the peace that comes from knowing that God is working in our lives to bring about the best possible outcome, which is healing of mind, body, and spirit. The challenges we face today is not to choose between faith and science. We need both. Professional training programs for decades have discouraged discussion of religion and spirituality with patients. Publicly funded programs have been cautious so as not to promote specific religious traditions and have adhered to the separation of church and state. But things are gradually changing as studies show that spirituality can be an important part of the treatment and recovery process. Spiritual assessment tools are being developed for mental health professionals. But our faith communities can be an integral part of providing support and referral services for persons living with a mental illness. One of the focuses of the spiritual journey is the question of why there is suffering in the world and where do we find hope and meaning in our very dark times. It is really impossible to explain the psychological pain associated with mental illnesses. Depression affects all aspects of our life, including our spiritual well-being. It strikes at the very soul, and it makes us feel like we are cut off and separated from God's love and acceptance. It's like a thief in the night. It steals one's sense of self-worth, our hopes and dreams for the future. And when you're in it, it feels like it's always going to be that way. I often refer to the story of Elijah from 1 Kings because it not only gives some ideas of the utter hopelessness and despair associated with depression, but it also offers insights on how our congregations might be a caring presence for persons who have pulled back from God and are feeling lost in despair. Let me review the story for you. In Elijah's time, worship of the pagan idol Baal had become widespread in Israel, and the prophet Elijah tried to restore the worship of Yahweh. After a dramatic showdown with the priests of Baal on Mount Carmel, in which Elijah was victorious, Queen Jezebel, sympathetic to Baal worship, threatened Elijah's life. Instead of being praised for risking his life by standing up to the priests of Baal, Elijah was condemned. Elijah left his servant and fled to the desert, where he took refuge under a broom tree. He wished he would die. Instead of gathering his friends around him for support, he isolated himself. Having been there myself, my understanding of this story is that Elijah was experiencing many of the symptoms of depression, such as lack of sleep, physical exhaustion, feeling rejected and worthless, isolation, and irrational negative thoughts about his own death. But Elijah was not criticized or told his depression was a sin. He wasn't told to snap out of it, get some exercise, and get back to work. Instead, he was ministered to by an angel. The angel brought him food and drink, and then he was allowed to sleep. Elijah's story reveals important insights as to how each of us and our faith communities can support persons with mental illness. How I wish someone had brought food to place under the broom tree of my porch to feed my family and myself. How I wish I had been the recipient of prayers, cards, and tokens assuring me that I was not alone when I was in the psychiatric hospital. I was fortunate enough to have a wonderful psychiatrist who encouraged me to embrace the spiritual part of my journey in the darkness. He was Jewish, actually, and learned a lot about the Christian tradition during the time that we worked together. He also worked closely with my pastoral counselor. It was this relationship with my psychiatrist and pastoral counselor that has enabled me to be in recovery today. It was also the love and support of my husband who embraced and embarked on the difficult journey of living with a loved one who has a mental illness. Mental illness is not a moral or a spiritual failure. Mental illness is a treatable illness. It is important to be able to refer persons to competent therapists and counselors in the community. I have done 3 very sad memorial services for persons who were told by their so-called Christian counselors to stop taking their medication and just pray to Jesus. I now preach the importance of being in relationship with each other and with other people and with our faith communities. When I accepted my mental illness and began to reach out to others, I gradually emerged from my deep darkness and discovered the gift of hope. You see, medications may stabilize the symptoms, but it's relationship and love that heal the soul. I look back and I realize that I was not alone in my despair. I also realized that I persevered, and with the help and support of others, I was able to choose life. I have found hope in listening to and reading stories of healing and wholeness restored in the lives of other people who have struggled with this illness. Hope is not wishful thinking or escapism. Hope is grounded in the steadfast love of God, who has acted in our past, is acting in our present, and will continue to act in our future. After 13 years in my local church, I took a sabbatical leave, and Mental Health Ministries was birthed in 2001. The mission of Mental Health Ministries is to provide educational resources to help erase the stigma of mental illness in our faith communities, and to help them become caring congregations for persons living with a mental illness and those who care for them. Every congregation has its own unique culture with a particular set of beliefs and values, behaviors, and traditions that have emerged over a period of time. Our user-friendly materials offer a wide variety of resources that can be adapted to the needs of each congregation. I use the Caring Congregation 5-step model to help congregations begin or expand a mental health ministry in their church. I use 5-step model, but there's many different kinds of models that can be used, but it includes education, commitment, welcome, support, and advocacy. These steps are not linear, rather the process of becoming a caring congregation is dynamic and unique to each community. I want to share with you an example of how a specific congregation used this Caring Congregations model to birth a comprehensive community mental health ministry in Boulder, Colorado. In October of 2007, I had the privilege to speak at their first conference that was organized by just a small group of committed persons. It is always amazing to me to see what kinds of ministries emerge when we become seed planters. Well, my question a few years later to one of the key persons involved in this outreach was, what was the catalyst that led to a task force coming together to sponsor that first conference? What was that initial seed that was planted that led to the congregation getting involved? Well, it turns out that one member of the church was grieving profoundly after the deaths of both of her children by suicide, and she shared her grief with the pastor. The pastor knew that this woman wanted and needed to do something with her grief and referred her to my colleague. He was already involved with NAMI Family to Family program as a result of his son's struggles with addiction and bipolar disorder, and also by his brother's suicide some years ago. This connection was the beginning, the very beginning, of a task force being started at that church. The pastor did not become directly involved in the task force or in the unfolding of that church's mental health ministry, but he was able to initiate and suggest a referral. I can't stress how important it is for clergy to be aware of referral sources within their congregation and to mental health providers in their community. My colleague wrote back, "It goes back to the person in the congregation who somehow has been given the gift of personal experience around mental illness, along with some nudge somewhere for combining that experience with their religious, spiritual experience. Then by the Spirit, people do find each other, and the seed begins to bear fruit." Well, this small group in Boulder went on to establish a nonprofit interfaith network on mental illness that continues to provide a wide variety of interfaith education and training programs for faith leaders in that community. When I first started sharing my story and connecting with faith communities, I never expected that I would be standing here today. I believe that God uses our struggles with mental illness to help us find ways to be supportive of persons living with these brain disorders. Because of my experience with the church, I will continue to help congregations find ways to be a caring community for persons living with mental illness and their families. For me, the most painful part of this journey was the feeling of disconnection. A supportive faith community would have helped me feel that I was connected to something bigger than my own feelings of worthlessness and hopelessness. A supportive faith community would have embraced my family. We would not have had to suffer in silence. I pray that the time will come when families living with a loved one with mental illness will be silent no more. I'd like to end with a prayer that I wrote while I was in the midst of my own personal darkness. Spirit God, you know our needs, our wounds, our hurts, our fears, even before that we can form them into words of prayer. You are patient with us, you are protective of us. You are present with us until such time we are able to ask for what we need. Thank you, Spirit God, for your healing taking place within before we are even aware of how broken we have become. I want to thank you for the opportunity today to share my story with you.
All right. As promised at the beginning of this webinar, I'm going to take you through the Mental Health Ministries website now. So when you log on, it's www.mentalhealthministries.net. Takes you to their home page, where you can see a little bit about what they do. Here's our latest spotlight, highlighted resources that you can download both in Spanish and in English. Brief overview of their DVD sets, as well as a 4-session resource and study guide, again both in English and Spanish. Here is Susan Gregg Schroeder's bio. It says, as a United Methodist minister and a person who has struggled with depression, I started Mental Health Ministries with the vision of producing high-quality resources to reduce the stigma of mental illness in our faith communities. I experienced firsthand the reluctance of our faith communities to talk about or to minister to persons with a mental illness and their families. Too often, mental illness is thought of as a moral or spiritual failure rather than a treatable illness. Many persons with a mental health issue will go first to their clergy or faith leader, but studies show that many clergy are not effective in providing the support and referrals that individuals and their families need. Helping faith communities becoming caring congregations is my passion. The response I receive from groups using our resources to educate about mental illness is overwhelming. I've had the privilege of speaking at conferences and seminars nationwide to give the message that hope and recovery are possible. When mental illness is openly discussed, people will come out of the shadows. It is my prayer that our congregations will be there to surround them with the care and compassionate support. Hope is a gift of faith communities can give to all of those who struggle with these disorders of the brain. It's a brief history of the organization and of Susan Gregg Schroeder herself. Here are some of the resource guides available from Mental Health Ministries. You can see there's an extensive amount of resources available to you if you're interested in the intersection of faith and mental health. They've created videos, DVDs, written books, there's also testimonials towards the bottom and the option of contacting them directly. As I said in the beginning, we'd love for you to engage with us on social media. Feel free to at facebook.com/NAMI San Diego. Try to put at least one relevant article up on our Facebook per day. You can see today's is about what to do to avoid anxiety in social situations. And we'd love for you to engage with us. Feel free to always comment, like, share, whatever you'd feel like it. Finally, if you're ever wondering what's going on in the Tech Cafe, give us a Google or type in techcafe.namisandiego.org. From the Tech Cafe site, you have a bunch of resources that we have handpicked for you, including testimonials, breaking news, tech tips, and my favorite, wellness and technology webinars. Here's a brief look at the team. You can take a look at our current statistics and a schedule of our Tech Cafe Basic Skills computer classes. Finally, if you haven't been already, make sure you check out NAMI San Diego's homepage at namisandiego.org. The website is kept up to date with any events that may be happening in and around San Diego. Breaking news like news articles, promotional videos that we've created surrounding our applications, information about our annual walk, NAMI Walks Run San Diego County, educational, supportive, and advocacy resources. And you can take a look at all of NAMI San Diego's vast resources and different departments and programs that we have to offer here. And if you haven't done so already, we'd love for you to download our mobile application, Oscar, the organized support companion for an emergency situation. Here is the landing page for the application. It gives you a brief overview. If you don't have a smartphone though, and you'd like to access Oscar, you can always go to app.oscar.org. and take a look at the web-based version of the application. I hope you have enjoyed today's wellness webinar. I look forward to seeing you in any future wellness webinars that you'd like to join me for. And again, happy Mental Health Awareness Month. Look forward to seeing you soon.